Where's everyone joining us from today? Seattle, Philadelphia, nice. Tampa, Maryland, all over. I love that.
Oh, we have a big spread, lots of time zones.
We do. I'm in Seattle too. Hi, Robin.
Sunny Seattle. Something we haven't had enough of in the last couple of weeks.
It's
Well,
true.
thank you for joining everybody. We're really excited to have you here today, and hopefully we have some pretty interesting content for you all. We do something slightly different for those of you who've come and joined these sessions before. We're going to have a little bit less focus on sort of SeekOut and tool and sort of practical how-tos, and a little bit more focus on strategy and tactics of how passive candidate sourcing actually works. Haven't presented this before, so this will be an interesting test. Back in the days when I used to train recruiters, this was about 2 weeks worth of content, and we're condensing it down into the 45-minute version. So we're taking just a really, really high-level look at how this all works. But hopefully it'll provide you with some interesting insights, and of course, always happy to have follow-on conversations. And if the interest is there, maybe we'll take some deeper dives in future and go into some of the subtopics in more detail as well. With that, we're about 3 minutes in, so I think we're probably good to start. I'm going to start sharing my screen. As a reminder, this is a webinar, which is my favorite kind of conference because you're all on mute and I'm the only one that can talk. So I'm going to enjoy myself for the next hour. If you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop them into the chat as we go along. I can't read that and present at the same time, but my lovely colleagues, Skylar and Kelsey, are here. They're going to keep an eye on that. They can respond in chat, but they can also stop me if there is something that we need to take a quick look at. And at the end, if there's time, we'll come back and we'll do a deeper dive into Q&A as well. We've also got some great giveaways. We've got some fantastic SeekOut swag, some awesome sweaters that we are going to be sending out today. And there's some poll questions that we'll be hitting as we go along. So please stay on for the whole call because you need to be here at the end in order to get those. And we'll be picking some winners based on the poll questions as we go through. So with no further ado, let's get into talking about my guide to passive candidate sourcing. I like to start all of these by giving at least a brief introduction or trying to answer the question of why in the world should you listen to me? For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ed. I'm the head of customer success here at SeekOut. I've been with the organization for about 18 months now. Previous to this, I spent quite a long time in the talent acquisition world. I was a recruiter. I worked internal, I worked agency, I worked in an RPO, and I ran an RPO at one point. I did a lot of work around helping companies define and implement their recruiting and sourcing strategy, particularly in relation to passive candidate sourcing and niche and hard to fill roles, largely in the tech area in Seattle and in Silicon Valley. So this is something that I've done a ton of over the years. I'd like to think I've got at least a rough idea of how it all works. And I also come to realize over the years I do this really differently than lots of other people. And if you were here recently talking or seeing us talk with Lou Adler about his approach is absolutely fantastic, and I love it. Marvin Smith shared his approach with us just last week. He also has a fantastic workflow for this. I'm a giant fan of it. And today I am going to share my workflow for this, which is a little bit different and hopefully will be interesting to you all. So what we're going to hopefully talk about today is literally the key to being successful with passive candidate sourcing. It is very high level. We are really just looking at the overarching strategy of how a passive candidate sourcing workflow should work. And we're not really going to be touching too much of the tactics or sort of the day-to-day heavy lifting that goes into that kind of work. I know recruiters have many different jobs and they work in many different ways. Everybody has a different recruiting process and workflow, and lots of organizations are going to have really specific requirements around how that works that might mean something like this doesn't actually fit into it, but we'll still talk about what I think is the, I suppose, gold record approach to solving this particular kind of problem. I do also want to stress that there is no right answer to this particular question. I mentioned our discussion with Lou and Marvin recently. They have fantastic sourcing workflows that work really well. And mine is a little bit different, and there are lots of other people out there who have sourcing workflows that work really well too. So I'm not here to tell you that this is the only way of doing it, or that even this is necessarily the best way of doing it. I'm here to share what works for me and what has worked for teams that I've sort of managed in the past, and hopefully provide a few things that you can take away and add to your toolbox as part of that. I will preface this by saying that my view of passive candidate sourcing, as I've discovered in recent years, is apparently a little bit controversial. And I've got this wonderful photo here because personally, I actually think that recruiting and passive candidate sourcing is a lot like bricklaying. And what do I mean by that? Well, it looks deceptively easy, and a lot of people think that it isn't a skill, but it is actually very difficult and takes a lot of practice to do right. And when somebody's doing it really well, they make it look effortless. The other really interesting thing about sort of bricklaying or masonry is that once you learn those core skills, you can build almost anything with it. You can build a wall like the person in our photo here, but you could also build a house. You could build a pond. You could build a cathedral. And I actually really believe that recruiting and passive candidate sourcing work in exactly the same way. There is no difference between technical recruiting, between buyer recruiting, recruiting for sales, recruiting for engineering, recruiting for executives. The process works. It's just a matter of finding it and repeating it and actually knowing your subject matter. I know a lot of people don't really think that, but that has always worked for me. And I think that this particular process that we're going to go through today really applies to basically any kind of passive candidate sourcing in almost any industry and for almost any kind of role. We're going to cover a couple of topics today. At a high level, I hope to be able to provide some insight in terms of the various stages of running this passive candidate workflow. We're going to talk about how we understand a role. We're going to talk about planning and executing our search, how we engage candidates, and what we should be thinking about as part of those initial conversations. And then we'll take just a sneak peek at the end about using data and looking at recruiting pipelines and how we can predict workloads and outcomes as part of that. I'm probably going to hop across to SeekOut at least once or twice during this and show a quick example of how our tool can help with some of these areas. But most of it is really going to be a conversation as opposed to being live in the tool, which, as I mentioned, is a little bit different from how we normally do things. So fingers crossed it works well for us. All right, so I'd like to start off. Your first step is really understanding the role. And I think that this is extremely important and something that's often overlooked. We cannot run any kind of inbound or outbound recruiting process without having a really deep understanding of what we're hiring for, why, for who, and all the nuts and bolts that go with that. When I think about understanding the role, I really break it down into a couple of key categories. The mechanics are really important. What are the skills and qualifications that are going to be relevant for this role? Now you'll notice that I actually lead this with the problem. What is it that this hire is going to solve? Why are we bringing them into the team? This is significantly more important than skills and experience, than requirements, than qualifications in the vast majority of cases. And it's important for a couple of reasons. One, it allows us to understand what kind of person we're looking for beyond a couple of keywords. But two, it becomes critical to actually being able to sell the opportunity to somebody, convince them to come into the recruiting process, and ultimately have an interview process that is making an objective decision as opposed to a subjective decision. If we don't understand the problem that this person is here to solve, how can we possibly assess whether or not they're actually going to solve it for us? So I like to lead with that. It is also, of course, very important to understand the must-haves and the nice-to-haves. There are going to be skills and qualifications that are important outside of the problem that the person is solving for us. If we're talking about something in the medical space, maybe licensure is very important. If we're talking about something in the DoD or the government industry, maybe certifications or clearances are really important. We might need specific programming languages. We might need experience on a specific marketing platform. We do want to understand those things. And again, it's critical to helping us find the right person, but critical to helping us explain the role and why we're trying to hire them. Experience is often in here as well. We're looking for somebody junior or senior. Do they have to come from a particular kind of industry? Are their backgrounds that are going to be really relevant for us? And then the sort of the mechanics of what an offer might look like. What are we paying? What kind of benefits are involved? What perks are here that are going to be relevant? And they could be monetary perks, they could be insurance, but they can also be team and culture perks. They could be job perks. They could be things like flexible work hours or working from home. The only way to answer these questions is by talking to the hiring manager. And if you can't talk to the hiring manager, you are being set up to fail as a recruiter or a sourcer. So my suggestion would be you insist you have these conversations. It is extremely important that you can get as close to the team and the manager as possible. It is critical to helping you understand how to find the right candidate, but it is also critical to you being able to sell the role and the opportunity with credibility. And when it comes down to it, we are all in a sales role, and we need to have that information so that we can have those conversations and find the right people. Environment is really important as well. People don't just change jobs for salary and professional development. You've all heard the adage of people don't quit jobs, they quit managers. That's very true. They also quit offices, they also quit cultures, they also quit missions, and they also quit locations. And these things, again, are really critical to helping us understand what kind of person we're looking for, and to be able to talk to them and make sure that they're actually interested in the opportunity and are going to be a good fit for us and be happy in the role that we're offering. Manager and teammates is critical. Being able to talk about who you're going to work with, why that is a good thing, what these people are going to be able to give back to the new employee in terms of mentoring or skills development or professional development. Understanding the mission and values of both the company and the team. Many organizations are highly mission or value driven. If that's the case, you really want to hire people that align with those goals. In some cases, it would really not work if that wasn't true. And these can be very strong selling points depending on what your organization does. You know what? At one point, I did some recruiting for the Seattle Cancer Council here in Washington. They had a very strong mission and very strong values, and that was something that we led with in our messaging, and it really helped us find people who believed in what the organization was trying to do, which was working on technology and sort of infrastructure to help further the research and cure for cancer. And finding people who are passionate about that, who self-selected in and wanted to do that kind of work as opposed to advertising or social media or gaming was really critical to finding people who would be happy and stay long-term with the organization. Culture is really important too. I like to call it the vibe. We're not talking about the culture statement of the company, but we're talking about what it actually means to work in this team. Are we pedal to the metal? Are we work hard, play hard? Are we laid back? Do we all go home at 4 p.m.? Do we start at 6 in the morning? Are we taking calls on the weekends? Are we getting together and having lunch as a team every day? Do we go out and celebrate? There are lots of things that go into making up a culture or a vibe of a team. And this is pretty critical. You want to find people who are going to be a good fit, who are going to enjoy working there. Doesn't mean that you're looking for people who are exact clones of everybody who's already in the group, but you do need to be able to articulate this to make sure that, again, somebody can self-select in and they're going to be happy in that environment. Hopefully, they're going to be a long-term employee. And location's always been important. Commute is huge. Most people look at location as the very first criteria when looking for a new role. A lot of the time these days, that means work from home, but not always. And we do want to be able to understand and articulate that, take it into consideration for our search, and then make sure that we can have those discussions with candidates. And finally, what's the purpose of the role? We talked about the problem that they're going to be solving, but it goes a lot further than that. What is this person actually going to do every day? Are they going to be on the phone every day? Are they going to sit at their desk and are they going to code? Are they going to be walking around the hospital talking to patients? What is a day in the life of this role? Really important, again, for helping us find the right person, but equally important for talking about the opportunity and making sure that person feels that we are the right role. Understanding things like the reach and the impact of the role is really important to be able to sell it. And what does success look like? Somebody comes in, what's their first 90 days going to look like? What's going to cause us to say that this was the right hire, we got the right person, they solved the problem for us? We need to be able to talk about these things as part of selling an assessment. We need to be able to talk about what's next. Are there professional development opportunities? What does the next promotion look like? What sort of salary increase might be available there? Something that we want to take into consideration, really help us sell the opportunity as well as we're talking to people. We wrap all of this up into something that we call the EVP, the Employee Value Proposition. This is really going to allow us to craft a benefit statement, a selling point that we can use in our messaging when we're actually talking to somebody face-to-face, that's going to get across not just what the job is and why it's exciting for the employee, because that's what it's about, not the problem the company is trying to solve, but it's going to help them decide if they want to buy our role, if they want to come and interview with us and maybe accept our offer. Critical step, often overlooked, something that you really do want to focus on up front and make sure that you've done as well as you possibly can, and that you're getting it directly from the horse's mouth, or you are, again, set up for failure. And this is going to drive everything that we do going forward. So I really recommend thinking about this in as much detail as you possibly can.
Before we move on, Ed, we do have a great question from Danielle. I am working with a consulting firm doing RPO, and the leads are client facing, so I do not talk with the client. How do you suggest that I proceed?
I suggest that you get yourself a seat at the table. I know it is not always possible, but if you want to be an influential and a credible recruiter, you need to be part of those conversations. Having a go-between and playing whispers between the requirements of the role and the candidates that we actually talk to is not doing anybody any favors. You're making your job harder than it needs to be. The client is making their job harder than it needs to be. And ultimately, the likelihood of us getting candidates that are not going to be a good fit into the interview process is increasing. I would talk to your managers. I would talk to the people who are thinking about this recruiting process. I would try and explain the value of having the recruiters and sources talk to the people who are the decision makers face to face to get this information. And I think in most cases, when people understand that, that opportunity is going to be there. It won't always. There are certainly organizations and processes that don't allow for this sort of thing. But again, I believe you're at an immediate disadvantage off the start if you don't have the ability to be working directly with the people that you're recruiting for. Once we've got a good idea of what we're looking for, the next goal is trying to figure out how we're going to find it. So hopefully we understand our value proposition. We've got all those details, the nuts and bolts, as well as the intangibles of the role. And then we start thinking about how we're going to run an actual search and recruiting process. You might not be running the entire recruiting process. You might really just be focused on search and engagement. So maybe some of these things aren't going to apply in your particular environment. But if you are across the end-to-end process, then really making sure we get that defined up front is pretty key. And I like to start with the stakeholders. Hiring manager alignment is probably the most important one. So coming back to that first point, have we actually spoken to the hiring manager in person and confirmed that we both understand what we're looking for, and whether or not we are going to be able to actually make a hire if we find the right person? And those of you who've been doing recruiting a long time, especially if you've been in agency or RPO environments, and I'm sure in many internal places too, you will have been through this. You will have had 4 or 5 candidates through for a role. Everybody is getting a no. You finally get in front of somebody who's actually a decision maker, and you realize that you have gone down the wrong path and you've been looking for the wrong thing. And maybe they changed their minds, or maybe you just never made it to you in the first place, but that was just a massive waste of everybody's time. So those face-to-face conversations and confirmation that we all agree on what we're doing and what we're looking for are pretty critical. Understanding what kind of support is available to you. Do you have tools? Are there other recruiters and sources that you're working with? Are there maybe existing candidates from a previous role or other projects you can look through that are going to kickstart things? Can you advertise? Are you just doing passive sourcing? Can you look in the applicant tracking system? All of these things are going to be pretty critical. The interview team and process. If you're driving this, you want to make sure that you've got that set up for success. that the interview team has been trained, that they understand the decision-making criteria, and that decision-making criteria is actually based on the problem and success criteria that we discovered as part of the EVP, because if it's not, we're never going to hire somebody that can actually solve the problem at hand. That we understand how to assess and how to make an objective hiring decision instead of a subjective hiring decision. All deep topics that require lots of discussion, but maybe something for another day. And do we all agree on what that decision-making criteria is and what sort of timeframes are involved? Are we hiring tomorrow? Do we need to interview 40 people first? Can they not start until Q2 of next year? All critical things. If you're not actually running this process, you might not get to sway any of these things, but it is super, super important that you understand them. When you are talking to a passive candidate, you have to be able to talk about the hiring manager. You have to be able to talk about the interview process and the decision-making criteria and the timeframes. You can't pre-qualify people without having answers to those questions, and you can't let them know what to expect if you don't know what to expect yourself. And being able to tell people what to expect, making sure there are no surprises during the recruiting process is really critical to having a good candidate experience, and hopefully eventually getting a yes when you present an offer. So all of this is stuff that you should have intimate knowledge of, and you can talk candidates through, you can help them prepare, you can make sure there are no surprises, you can make sure that they're actually bought in to this whole process. If they have to do 40 interviews and a coding test, we need to tell them that up front. Otherwise, nobody's actually going to get through it. So you need this information to have those conversations. Next, we really need to think about what we're looking for. I mean, hopefully we have a good idea of what this person might look like, the kind of titles they have, the problem they're going to solve, the experience they need. And then this is really when we start thinking about, how will I identify this person? What skills keywords might I be looking for? What kind of experience am I going to be searching for? Is diversity important, and how is that going to play a part in my outreach and search? Are there titles that might be really relevant? Are there competitors that we want to poach from or stay away from? Are there locations that we need to focus on? So you should really be writing all of this stuff down and trying to come up with essentially this picture or this description of the ideal candidate before you begin your search. And finally, we have got our sort of tools. Excuse me for messing that up. Where are we going to do this search? What are we going to use to research? How are we going to search and shortlist? Are we doing it in our applicant tracking system or our recruiting CRM? Are we doing it on LinkedIn Recruiter? Do we have access to a tool like SeekOut? How's engagement going to work? Am I going to email people? Am I going to call them? Am I going to send an email message? Am I going to message people through Indeed? What do I do when they get back to me? And then how do I get them in my recruiting pipeline? What's my call to action, and what do I do with people who are actually interested in the role? And this is actually probably an opportune point just to make a quick hop over into SeekOut. I'm only going to do this a couple times today. I'm going to change my screen share, and hopefully we're looking at my browser. I was a big user of SeekOut before I joined SeekOut, implemented a number of organizations back within the TA space, and I think this is really great for that kind of research and hiring manager engagement. I'm going to load a pre-saved search I did a little bit earlier. This is one that is looking for a sourcing recruiter, which I thought might be pretty relevant for this conversation. Done quite a complex search. We're looking for people here based on title, but we've also called out a couple of keywords that are really relevant for people who are likely to be advanced sourcing recruiters already. And I come back with a pretty big candidate pool in North America. I've got 65, 66,000 people here to choose from. So if I'm thinking about how I refine that and where I want to search and what I want to search for, I really like working with this People Insights tab, which is this graphical representation of the talent pool, which lets me see a whole bunch of key criteria about the pool that I'm looking for, and then really quickly refine my search. So as I go through, I'm looking at locations, for example. Maybe this is sort of pre-COVID and it's an office-based role. I have a couple different offices to pick from. I mean, if I'm looking for people in New York, I've got a reasonably large talent pool. I have almost 5,000. If I'm looking for people in San Diego, I have a relatively small talent pool, only about 800. And sort of understanding that and thinking about how it impacts my conversations with hiring managers, where we advertise and where we search could be critical. And in this case, we might decide that we're looking for New York-based candidates. I can actually click on that, and this is all interactive. So my 65,000 candidates are now 6,500 candidates, and we're looking at this new pool in real time. Diversity could be really relevant to us. We might want to go out there and run a proactive diversity campaign where I'm looking for female candidates, or I'm looking for Black or African American candidates. And again, SeekOut allows us to do that kind of search, and we can refine our talent pool. I can look at things like titles. I can look at things like years of experience. Maybe I need somebody really senior for this role, so I want somebody with more than 10 years of experience. And with just a couple of clicks, potentially something that we could have been doing live with the hiring manager as part of making sure we actually have skills and qualifications that make sense. We can go through, we can refine our talent pool, we can find a number of people that are hopefully going to be really relevant to us, and know that we're going to be on the right track when we start the actual engagement piece. Hopping back to the presentation, once we've got, or actually before I go forward, our first poll question number 1. Which of these insights help you identify opportunities for remote positions? Please feel free to jump in and give your best answer. A reminder at the end, we're going to be giving away some awesome SeekOut swag. We're going to pick some people from those that have answered the polls. So we'll give you just a few seconds to complete this, and then we will keep moving forward. Might actually just try and pick up the pace a little bit too. I realize we might be running a tiny bit slower than I hoped. While you're doing that poll, we are going to be talking about the actual search next. Once we've got a good idea of how we're going to sell our role and how we identify people that might be a good fit, we know the mechanics of what we're hiring for. We know all the people and processes involved. We know what tools we're going to use, and there are many out there for you to choose from, although I hope you seek out. We can talk about how we run our actual search and shortlist. So our first search, you got to start somewhere. And the first search is probably not one that's going to get you the candidates that you're looking for. But you really want to get into whatever tool that you're using, and make sure that you are running your first search and sort of following the breadcrumbs going down that path. You're going to have a lot of choices available to you, and these might depend on what you're looking for, the tools that are available, and your level of skill or comfort with these tools. There are lots of filter-based UI search options available to you. You might be the sort of person that wants to write a big complex Boolean search. In tools like SeekOut, you have power filters. So we have tons of pre-written searches that cover dozens and dozens of really common topics. If you're looking for a machine learning engineer or a data scientist, if you're looking for a SaaS salesperson, if you're looking for a CPA accountant, we have pre-written searches that you can click on and will automatically go through and run a best-in-case scenario search for you, which you can, of course, then go and refine. You might have AI and cloning options available to you. Maybe you can pick a candidate that's already a great fit, or somebody who works for that company that you love, and you can clone that profile and find similar people. You can do that in SeekOut. You can also upload a job description, and we'll automatically go through and we'll find matching candidates for you. There's the diversity side of things. Very similar to what I just showed you as part of that research we were doing. We can go through and we can do that kind of search. Usually, running that kind of search makes you realize that you need to make some pretty big changes. My first search is usually never the one that actually gets me anything interesting, but your ability to iterate on that, maybe use some of those data visualizations, maybe think outside the box, will send you down the right path. And as you go through and as you run these searches, and you might find yourself refining this search 5, 10, 15, 20 times over the course of a couple of hours as you go through this process, you're probably going to start finding interesting prospects as you go along, and then you can start shortlisting people and getting yourself organized. Now, we could use projects to do that. We might be collaborating with a hiring manager. You might be integrating with your ATS or CRM and actually pushing prospects into a prospect pool or into a role that you have in your ATS or CRM through our API integration. And just essentially turning that crank and moving that process along and getting your shortlisted candidates. How many prospects you need to shortlist is an interesting question, and something that we can actually predict. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the call today. But once you get some volume going, it is definitely something that we can look at. And again, if we just sort of hop back to SeekOut, we've got a very Boolean-driven search at the moment. I've done something relatively large and complex that you might not do as part of your day-to-day searching. But as I mentioned, we've got a lot of options here to come through and add filters. So we're looking at female candidates at the moment through our diversity tag. I could easily come in here and say, hey, I only want to see people who have the senior recruiter job title. We could come in here as well and look at current companies and say Nordstrom is where we want to hire from. And again, we're continually refining our candidate pool. We have a lot of other filters turned on at the moment, so we're not seeing a huge number of results. But if I turn off the years of experience and I turn off the diversity filter, we'll see our pool start to expand. And again, we're sort of going through and we're iterating through this process and finding the people that might be a good fit for us. I have another can search that I've written, which is a similar sort of thing. We're looking for experienced recruiters, but in this case, I'm only looking at people who worked at FANG companies. And if this was the search that we were doing and I'd done my work and I was refined as I needed to be, here is when we can start going through and maybe shortlisting. I can take people from SeekOut, and any tool that you're using is going to have very similar functionality. I'm going to add them to a project so I can organize myself. And then I can go and look at sort of next steps. In my case, if I was here, this is probably a good point to stop and talk to the hiring manager. In SeekOut, I can do that by sharing the project. I can generate a link. I can Slack it to the hiring manager. They can come into this sort of locked view and they can see this project, and they can add sort of comments to let me know whether or not I'm on the right track. We've got statuses and tags that we can work with as well. Always good to try and do a little bit of level setting before you spend too long looking for candidates, just in case you're not finding the right people. I also have the option of exporting these to a spreadsheet or into my ATS or CRM, if that's where I'm going to be running my engagement campaign. And of course, one of the great benefits of SeekOut is that we are pulling email addresses and phone numbers for people. We're going to let you message off LinkedIn Recruiter. You can run those drip campaigns, which we'll talk about in a minute, hopefully get much better engagement rates than you are seeing just through tools like LIREC. That leads us to poll question number 2. Which of these features can be customized for your organization? Boolean, power filters, and AI cloning. Probably should have talked about that. So I'm going to give you the answer as the poll comes up. We do indeed create custom power filters. Those best-in-class searches, we have dozens and dozens that we support out of the box, but we build them for you as well. We can build searches that include or exclude lists of companies. We can build searches that are focused on specific skills or fellowships or degrees or awards or recognition programs that are really relevant to what you're searching for. And these can easily be overlaid any other search that you are currently doing. That is a powerful feature of ours that we would normally do as part of bringing a new customer onto the platform, but can also be set up at pretty much any time. It was kind of cheating, wasn't it? Everybody better get that one right. Moving on, the next part I want to talk about is candidate engagement. So, hopefully we understand our role and the profile we're looking for. We have really thought about how the recruiting process is going to work. We've been able to run our searches. We have shortlisted a number of prospects that we think are going to be a good fit for the opportunity, based on those criteria and successes and skills and qualifications and team and culture values that we previously discussed. And now really comes the hard part. All of that was relatively mechanical. It was very easy to repeat that process. I think most people can learn to do that very well in a relatively short amount of time. But at this point, we start trying to sell people things. And selling people things is hard, especially jobs and especially passive candidates. When I first started recruiting, the director of the company that I worked for at the time as part of my training described recruiting as the most difficult sales job you can possibly do, because there are at least 2 products and they can both say no. And I think that is actually very true. And I've never really lost sight of the fact that this is a sales role, and we are selling. And we might be selling an opportunity, we might be selling professional development, we might be selling more salary, but we are absolutely selling both to the hiring manager and the candidate, and that is the job. So when we think about candidate engagement, what we're really thinking about is how do we sell this opportunity? And the very first part about selling the opportunity is getting somebody to pay attention to you. If they don't read your email or your in-mail, then we are not going to take it any further. We are not going to engage that candidate. We're not going to have the opportunity of moving somebody through the interview process. So that first message and how you message people is really, really critical. You all would have heard people complain about recruiter spam. You've probably been on the end of it yourself. There is a lot of low effort content and messaging that's out there, and it is not generating good results. So we really, really want to encourage you to think really deliberately about how you create really strong, really engaging, really personalized content so that you can stand out from everybody else and get people to have that conversation with you. And the very first thing I would say about that is that this content, this outreach that you're sending, it is almost never about you. I can't tell you how many passive candidate sourcing emails and campaigns I've seen that lead with things like, we're looking for a .NET engineer, or I need somebody with these skills. That is not what the candidate cares about. Nobody cares that you need a .NET engineer. Nobody cares that you need somebody who has 5 years of CFO experience. They don't change jobs because of those things. So don't lead your messaging with that. In fact, don't even put that in your messaging. What you really want to be thinking about is what's in it for this person. Why should they talk to you? Why might they be interested in this role? And the good news is that you know, because you figured it out as part of that employee value proposition that we did in step 1. All of those things that we talked about, the problem that they're going to be solving, the space that they're going to be working in, what success looks like, what the next steps are, the team, the culture, the vibe, the location, the salary, the perks, the benefits, that is what these prospects actually care about. And if you can articulate that, if you can articulate the value, the benefits of coming to do this role, which might be a better title, might be more salary, might be working with new technology, might be the world's most amazing boss and coworkers, it might be a great environment, and all kinds of environments can be great. There are people for everything, whether or not you're looking for somebody who wants to work 60 hours a week, or somebody who wants to work at the 75th percentile of salary. They're probably not the same people, but you'll absolutely find people who would like to do either, depending on the rest of the job details. This is what you're trying to do. People need to be able to self-select in or out based on the email or the messaging that you send them. So my advice is to really think about what's going to sway that decision and to make sure you provide them with enough detail. Nobody wants to have a discussion about some mysterious role with some mysterious company that has some mysterious project. They need to know who they're going to be talking to, why they're going to be talking to them, what the job might be, what the pay range is, what the location is, all the things that will let you say whether or not you want to have this conversation and maybe explore the opportunity further. I think a lot of recruiters, a lot of sources are really scared about putting that detail in messaging, I found. They think that maybe it'll turn too many people off or people will self-select out. The truth is that you want that. You don't want to do 200 phone screens with people who aren't going to accept the salary that you're offering, or who don't want to commute to DC, or who don't actually know VBA. So getting these things in your messaging and letting people say, hey, yes, this is for me based on what you told me, is really critical to running this program. It means that you probably have to source a lot more candidates and send a lot more emails to get the right ones to say, yes, let's talk about it. But it will save everybody a ton of heartache in the end. Personalization is really critical too. You don't want to look like you're sending canned emails. If you're doing something really important, you probably want to write each message individually. If you're doing a really large number of prospects, you want to make sure that you're using some sort of advanced mail merge technology so that you can personalize these as much as possible. And then you've got things like tone and content. You've got, length. Lots of people believe that these things should never be more than 300 characters or 300 words. Some people think that you should try and be really funny and catch people's attention. Other people think that you should be really serious and get to the point. These stylistic questions, you've got to test this and see what works for you, but you should also do what's true to the culture and value of what you're hiring for. If it's a fun team and a fun company, send a fun email. If it's a serious team and a serious company, send a serious email. You're trying to find people that will fit and will like that environment, and this is the first part of it. So as we're putting that all together, we don't want to forget that we are actually trying to sell somebody something, and we need to know what our goal is as part of that. What does making a sale mean for you? For me, when I run this process, making a sale means I get somebody on the phone. I never ask people to apply for a job. I don't send them into the applicant tracking system. I don't want them to go away and do some other action, like do a test or complete an application. I want them to talk to me. And we're going to go over all of these things in person. That's a pretty high touch approach. That means a lot of phone calls for me. And again, I know not every recruiting workflow is going to support that sort of thing. It is by far the most effective way of doing it. If you're asking people to go and apply, you're going to get a ton that are not going to do that. If you want somebody to jump on the phone call, you will have a much better rate of actually getting yeses. Sometimes it's a call with me, depending on what I'm hiring for. I might actually pitch a call with the hiring manager or somebody else from the team directly too. But I always go for that phone call because I want to talk to these people. I want to pre-qualify them. I want to sell them on the opportunity face to face. I want to answer their questions and I want them to answer my questions. And I want to know whether or not we can move them through the recruiting pipeline. So knowing that goal, understanding that employee value proposition, knowing what our call to action is, hey, book some time with me, click on this button and apply for the role, whatever that is, it's very important. You have to have a call to action. You have to ask people to do something or they won't do anything. So we want to make sure that we're clearly articulating that in the email or the text message or whatever it might be. And we have to figure out how we're going to do this. Are we manually sending emails? Are we going through some sort of messaging platform like Indeed's resume database? Or are we using a tool like SeekOut and getting email addresses and sending emails directly? I like to do what is called a drip campaign, which is essentially setting up a sequence of 4 to 6 emails that will run over a couple weeks, sending every few days. SeekOut has built-in functionality for that at no extra cost. So you can define all your templates, you can mail merge them, you can get a big pool of prospects, and you can have them all run through that campaign in the background. They come directly from your email or from the hiring manager's email if you want them to, and then any responses come back directly to my inbox. And I can combine that with manual steps like email messages or phone calls or text messages and do a big omni-channel campaign. And that kind of automation lets me work with a much larger pool of prospects, but it also means that I have enormously better response rates. Typically the response rate to the first message is something like 20 or 30% if you are very, very lucky and you have a good brand and good messaging. When I do a 5 or a 6 email drip campaign, we're generating up to 80% response rates in some cases, depending on what it is that we're pitching and how good we were at finding the right candidate pool. And that makes all the difference, the amount of work we have to do and the quality of candidates that we have to work with. And finally, it's very, very important that we test and refine this process. Your first version is not necessarily going to work. Maybe it shouldn't have been fun. Maybe it should have been serious. Maybe this particular audience likes short emails versus long emails. There is no answer to this question. The only thing that you can do is A/B test these. As you run through this process, you'll develop your own gut feeling over time. You'll find the versions that work for you. You'll bring your own personality into it, and by making sure that you have data and reporting, you'll find the versions that are most effective for the company or the role or the environment that you're hiring for.
And we have another great question from Danielle. What is your opinion on attaching a job description to your engagement email?
I do not like to put attachments on engagement emails. They are more likely to trigger spam filters and can also cause problems if people are maybe viewing on a mobile device or opening the email from work and things are getting stripped out or causing other issues. Wherever possible, I think a link to something online works much better. And that works fine even if you're asking people for a phone call. We can have an email, we can say, hey, these are all the things that aren't in the job ad, and this is why I'm writing to you, and this is why I think you want to have a conversation with me. Here's the actual job ad in case you want to go and look at how we're advertising this publicly. But as the next step, don't apply for that. Come have a conversation with me. We'll give you the red carpet treatment and make sure you get straight to the hiring manager if it's a good fit. You don't have to go through the public application process. And you sort of tick all your boxes, and you make the candidate feel really special at the same time. That brings us to poll question number 3. Which of these engagement or candidate engagement steps is the hardest to achieve success? Getting attention, making the sale, or the delivery? Ooh, that's a tricky question. I'm not even sure, but I think they're all pretty hard, to be perfectly honest. It might not be a right answer to this question. While we're doing that, back here on our SeekOut project, we do have to try and sell some software while we're at it after all. We've gone through and we've made our project of our ex-FANG recruiters. We've gotten their email addresses, and I just want to briefly touch on how that messaging works. So I'm going to take my 10 candidates. I can drop them into a messaging campaign. So I am going to add them to this test campaign for the sake of it. I actually should have set one up before we had the conversation today, but that's all right. So here we're in one of those drip messaging campaigns that we've set up, and here's a very, very simple example. I should have done a better one of what some of these campaign steps look like. So I'm doing an omni-channel drip campaign. I can combine email, I can combine phone calls, text messages, and things like LinkedIn or in-mail requests. And I'm able to control when these things happen. So we're at step 3, and we're saying hypothetically that we want step 3 to happen 3 days after step 2. And I can do my subject, I can do my message body. I have all of my mail merge fields that I can include, including some pretty smart personalization. Like for engineers, we can do GitHub snippets that get automatically completed. And I can set these templates up to send from me or from the hiring manager. And I would typically be doing a 4 to 6 step campaign that's probably running over 2 to 4 weeks, depending on my time frame. I'd have that messaging and that EVP that we talked about. I'd be dripping a little bit more content into each step. You're trying to get people to reply to me with either a yes or a no. Technically, I don't care either way. I just want an answer. That is enough. And then as these replies come through, they come straight to my email, so I don't have to sit here and watch it and seek out, but the campaign also stops. So if they reply at step 2, we know we're not automatically going to send them 3, 4, 5, and 6. We can just deal with that reply, whether it's an opt-in or an opt-out. And if we're not doing it that way, we also have really great integrations to ATSs and CRMs. There's a couple dozen we support. I can take the whole project. I can choose to export them into a number of different systems: Lever, Greenhouse, Gem, Beamery, Telemetry, JobVite. There are many that we support. Push them into a prospect pool or push them into a role. And then maybe I'm doing the same thing. I'm running that drip campaign from there. And if I can't do that, we can also get all of this out via an Excel spreadsheet, super detailed export that includes absolutely everything that's on the profile, not just a couple fields, and we can import them into our CRM. We can run a mail merge through Word if that's what we're doing. We have a lot of options in terms of how we take that next step. Okay. So this is a great place to stop. Danger, Will Robinson. This is where lots and lots of recruiting processes go wrong. At this point, it might be really tempting to fake your employee value proposition. After all, it's entirely possible to craft an email and a messaging campaign and a recruiter conversation that is going to be super enticing. Maybe we leave out the part about the 60-hour weeks and the 75th percentile salary. Maybe we talk about professional development opportunities that aren't really there. Maybe we sell the team or the culture in a way that's designed to get people into the recruiting process and isn't actually the reality of how it works. This is really easy to do. You might be doing it intentionally because you need more people in the recruiting pipeline, or you might have done it accidentally because you didn't get a full picture or the truth about what you're actually hiring for. It works. You can absolutely create a fake EVP, and you can get a ton of people to come and talk to you, and you can probably hire a bunch of them. Usually it doesn't come out in the interviews in enough detail to figure out if it's all wrong. But it is extremely dangerous because 6 months later, they are all going to quit. And I have seen this firsthand in lots of different environments where either intentionally or unintentionally, we bring a bunch of people in who didn't know what the job was, didn't understand success criteria, weren't aware of what the real professional development opportunities were, didn't understand the team or the culture or the location or the hiring manager or any of these very important things. And a couple of weeks into the role, they figure out it is not what they signed up for. And a couple months into the role, they go and they do something else. And this is enormously more expensive and more time consuming and more damaging to your brand and your company and your product than just not hiring somebody in the first place. So I sort of stress that it is really important that we're all on the same page, that we do the best we possibly can in terms of articulating what we're really hiring for. Again, I think I think there's an element of fear in this. Like I think we think that, somebody doesn't want to come and work in my role because it is going to be hard, or maybe it doesn't pay as well as others, or the office is kind of dingy, or we're in a weird location. We don't have a really good mission or value statement. It's an industry that maybe people don't like very much compared to others. So we want to try and tweak those things. I would say don't. There is absolutely a job and an environment for everybody, and vice versa. Your candidate pool might be smaller, but you can find people who will work for 75% of median salary. You can find people who will want to do 60-hour weeks. You can find people who want to do 30-hour weeks. You can find people who will work in any kind of environment and who will enjoy it. And the point of recruiting, the point of passive candidate engagement, is to find the match between the role and the company, the hiring manager, and the actual person that you're hiring. So do find people who are real matches, and don't try and create a match. It's only going to come back to bite us in the bottom later on. As I mentioned, I take a very specific view of this process, which is people need to talk to me. I don't want them to apply. I don't want them to disappear in some applicant tracking system. I don't want them to send them my resume. I want to have a conversation with another person, and I want to make sure that we are aligned, and I want to sell the opportunity. I want them to sell me on them being suitable for the role, and I want to make sure that we have some actual next steps organized. So my goal is to always, always, always have a conversation with people who are interested. It might be a 5 or a 10-minute conversation. It might be a 1-hour conversation, depending on if I am hiring for an executive or an IC role. But I treat them all the same. And the first part is that I am selling the opportunity. And this is really critical. I am both selling and buying. I am selling the role and the package that I have at offer, and I'm trying to decide if I want to buy you as a candidate for this particular role. So again, very difficult sales job to do both those things at the same time. I need to be credible, and I need to be influential. There are a ton of horror stories about recruiters who don't know what they're doing or who don't understand the role or the team or the environment. I don't want to be that recruiter. I want to intimately know what this person is going to be doing. I want to understand the technology and the systems that are involved. I want to be able to answer their questions, and I want them to feel that I know what I'm talking about. And most importantly, we want details, not secrets. Interviews are not surprises. Work isn't a surprise. We tell people their expectations. We know what our goals are. We want people to work towards them. Surprise interviews don't work. If I have a 40-step interview process, let's get it out now. If I am not paying a great salary, let's get it out now. If I have specific requirements or I have specific benefits to this particular position, let's get it out now. People will drop out of the interview process. They do not want to be surprised. We want to make sure that we can lay all of these things out up front, that we get this person's buy-in and agreement that they want to go through this with us, that they're going to do their best, going to work towards the same outcome. There is nothing to gain from trying to hide any of these things or surprising people in the interview process. At the same time, I actually have to qualify. I don't want to run people through the interview process that aren't going to be able to do the job or aren't going to take the job. So I have to understand, are you actually interested? Like, would you really come and work for me and do this job if everything else lined up? Are you even really available? If I'm asking you to relocate, can you? Do you have a non-compete or a restraint of trade? Is the salary not going to work? Is the location not going to work? Do I understand what it might take to get you to say yes in terms of what motivates you and what you need from your next job? And am I confident that this job actually has it? If you need more salary than I have, if I'm in a location that doesn't work for you, there is no point for any of us going any further. Getting these things out, not being afraid of having that conversation, and being very clear in that very, very first conversation is absolutely critical to making sure that neither of us are wasting our time, and getting back to the no surprises topic, which is really important for candidate experience and making sure people accept our offers. And candidate experience is everything. The offer process started at the very first email we sent this person. People want to be wanted. They want to feel that we know what we're doing and that we're credible and that we have our stuff together, and that we are organized as a company. They want to feel that we have been telling the truth and that we've been open and that we are transparent about everything. And if we're not doing those things, we are not going to get our offers accepted. So we were planning that from day one and making sure we are doing all the right things. This is also the time to get people to commit to next steps. I need you to talk to the hiring manager. I need you to send me your resume. I need your GitHub account. I need you to be prepared to do a 1-hour coding exam. You have to send me a copy of your RN license. Whatever it is that we are interested in terms of moving this forward, the candidate needs to understand what it is, and we are either getting commitment to go and do that, or understanding when we're going to reconnect and decide whether we want to move forward in the process. They don't necessarily have to decide right now. And once again, no surprises. We're outlining everything that's going to happen between now and your start date, and we are going to make sure that you're aligned with that process and that you want to do those things too. And this is really how we go about making sure that we are actually closing. This is a sales role. We are trying to sell somebody something. We're trying to sell them something right now, which is to come and interview with me and hopefully take my job. So we're doing it through that lens, making sure we are qualifying people, making sure that we want to buy, but that we sell at the same time. And that will give us a much better chance of getting our offers accepted later. And that brings us to our last poll question, and we've only got a couple of slides left after this too. Which of these data points are considered to be part of basic candidate qualification? That one seems like a pretty interesting question, or a pretty easy question too. And I see that we've got a lot of answers already coming through. Please continue to fill that in, and I will step us forward because I know we're running a little bit short on time. Huge topic. I'm only going to touch on this at the very, very lightest level, like a lot of other things that we're talking about. But I think potentially in line with some of my other controversial opinions about recruiting, I actually believe recruiting is highly, highly predictable. And it is possible to build a model in almost any environment that's going to tell you exactly how much work and time and recruiters and screens are involved to fill a particular role. And here's an example of a typical recruiting pipeline. And we're looking at this. We've got, from the very top, how many profiles do we have to source, to the very bottom, how many hires have we made? You might have a slightly different recruiting process, but it's going to look something like this, more or less, wherever you are. And if we look at the data behind that recruiting pipeline, here's an example of a real recruiting pipeline that I've run at some point in the past when I was doing this kind of work hands-on. And here's how it works. So we made 4 hires in this particular case, if we're starting at the bottom. And to get those 4 hires, we had to make 6 offers. So we had a 70% offer to acceptance rate. To make those 6 offers, we had to interview 18 people. We had 33%, 1 in 3 of our interviews resulted in an offer. Of course, to get to interview loops, hiring managers have to do an interview first in this particular case. So hiring managers had to interview 24 people. They had a 75% acceptance rate, and that got us our 18 loops. I had to submit almost 80 candidates in this case to get my 24 interviews. And we had to do 159 recruiter screens to get the 80 that I submitted. To do those 159 screens, I had to get 317 candidates that actually engaged and said, yes, I am interested in this. And as part of that, I had to source 1,000 profiles. That feels like a lot, and it is a lot. Passive candidate sourcing is a lot of work to do well. This was a time-intensive process that probably ran over the course of 6 to 8 weeks to get those 4 hires with other things going on in the background. Ton of sourcing, ton of recruiter screens, ton of interviews, but we made our hires. This kind of data and understanding what this looks like in real time allows you to accurately predict what your recruiting workflow is going to look like, how much it's going to cost, how many people you're going to need, what your time to hire is going to be. But it also lets you find the hot spots and make some huge improvements in your recruiting process. I want to show just a couple of examples. We had a interview or we had an offer acceptance rate of 70% here in our first goal. And we had an interview pass-through rate of 33%, 1 in 3. If we did better at our interview loops, if we had 1 in 2 loops move forward to an offer, we went from 33 to 50%. Look at the difference in the rest of our pipeline. I've taken 3 interview loops out of the process, which is enormous if I'm using expensive people to do that. I've had to do 57 less screens, which is about 57 less hours worth of work, and I've had to source 381 less profiles. This whole thing has gone enormously faster and has taken up a ton less time and money, especially from the interview team, which is often incredibly expensive. If we look at another example, our offer rate was 75%. If we can make that offer rate 100% instead of 75, instead of needing 6 offers, I can only make 4. That takes 5 loops out of the process, 48 screens, and 317 profiles sourced. Again, we've made a huge change to that recruiting pipeline with just a tiny improvement in offer acceptance rate. And I can be combining these things together. I can get better at offers, but I can get better at loops and hiring manager screens and my screens and submission reviews all at the same time. And being able to look at this data in real time, understanding what's happening in the real world, how your competitors are running these processes, and refining this, making it an ongoing iteration, is going to enormously improve your recruiting process and outcomes. This is something I find a lot of companies don't actually do, but I highly recommend that you spend some time thinking about this kind of data.